The US, UK and Australian premiers announce a new defence plan for Asia-Pacific, complete with nuclear-powered submarines.
Facing 25 years in prison, the trial begins for the latest Russian opposition activist to face charges over speaking out against the Kremlin.
Rubbish piles up in the streets of Paris as bin collectors reject a bill in the French Parliament which could change the retirement age.
A town in Belgium is experiencing a living nightmare due to contamination from so-called forever chemicals from a nearby plant.
Australia is to buy as many as 5 nuclear-powered submarines, then build a new model with US and British technology. It's an ambitious plan to bulk up Western muscle across the Asia-Pacific in the face of a rising China. It's all part of the recently formed alliance between the UK, the US and Australia, known as AUKUS. Their leaders met in San Diego to unveil their plans. At the subsequent press conference, President Biden was keen to make one point clear.
These subs are powered, not nuclear armed subs. They're nuclear powered, not nuclear armed. Australia is a proud non-nuclear weapon state and is committed to stay that way.
For the first time ever, it will mean 3 fleets of submarines working together across both the Atlantic and Pacific, keeping our oceans free, open and prosperous for decades to come.
The scale, complexity and economic significance of this investment is akin to the creation of the Australian automotive industry in the post-World War II period.
Under the deal, Australian Navy personnel will be embedded at US and UK submarine bases to gain the necessary skills to use the submarines. From 2027, the US and UK will base a small number of nuclear subs at a base in Perth, Western Australia, before Canberra buys the first 3 American Virginia-class submarines in the early 2030s.
The trial has begun in Moscow of the latest Russian opposition activist to face charges over speaking out against the Kremlin. Vladimir Kara-Murza is accused of treason for spreading what prosecutors claim was fake news about the Russian army. He faces 25 years in jail.
В любом случае очевидно, что власти решили провести суд над Кара-Мурзой в космическом темпе, максимально быстро. Следующее заседание уже в четверг, 16 числа. И в том, каков будет финальный приговор, к великому сожалению, сомнений уже нет.
At the European Parliament, a prominent Liberal MEP spoke out against Moscow's treatment of Kara-Murza and other Kremlin opponents.
I think that this Parliament, during this session, has to stand by them and to put back on the table the liberation of Alexei Navalny and with them of all political prisoners. As Russia's Vladimir Kara-Murza, who is in prison, Alexei Gorinov and many others arrested for speaking out against the war in Ukraine.
Kara-Murza is a Western-educated activist who was a close associate of the assassinated opposition leader Boris Nemtsov. He's among several critics of Vladimir Putin to have been detained since Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Times are tough in Moldova, a country battling an energy crisis and recurrent protests. But the nation is not on the cusp of a military conflict. That's according to the Moldovan defense minister. Authorities suspect that ongoing anti-government protests are being stirred up by Russia.
Pericolele așa numitului război hibrid, care se manifestă prin dezinformare, fake news, care se reflectă prin tensiunile în societate, pe care Federația Rusă încearcă să le exerceze cu scopul de schimbarea ordinii politice, de destabilizarea situației și de răsturnarea puterii.
In February, Moldova's president was in Munich alongside the NATO Secretary General, where she seemed to open the door to joining the alliance.
În primul rând și o întrebare politică, asupra căruia sunt foarte multe discuții. Pentru noi este principal să avem o cooperare cu NATO, ceea ce noi ne-am propus și împreună cu colegii am reușit în ultimul an să aprofundăm această cooperare.
Moldova is one of the poorest countries in Europe, and conditions have only gotten worse since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The EU has provided aid, but dissatisfaction has been growing, especially in the breakaway region of Transnistria. European financial chiefs are seeking to reassure investors that there's little risk posed to European banks by the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank in the US. It was shut down last week as depositors rushed to withdraw funds. With memories of the 2008 banking crisis still fresh, the EU's Economy Commissioner said European institutions were in a stronger position.
All European banks, not only the biggest, the bigger, are applying the prudential Basel standard. So directly there is no contagion. The possibility of indirect impact is something that we have to monitor, but at the moment we don't see it as a significant risk.
The White House has intervened to dampen fears of a knock-on effect. US President Biden said regulations would be tightened and taxpayers protected.
I'm going to ask Congress and the banking regulators to strengthen the rules for banks to make it less likely this kind of bank failure would happen again, and to protect American jobs and small businesses.
Despite the reassurances, markets remain nervous on both sides of the Atlantic, particularly after the failure of another US bank over the weekend. So far, the crisis has been contained, but authorities are keeping a close eye on developments. Waste collectors in France have been on strike for a week, standing up against proposed pension reforms. Rubbish is piling up in the streets, and tourists visiting the City of Light are starting to notice the smell.
Je trouvais l'odeur est très désagréable. Quand on passe devant et quand il faut enjamber, on est passé de rue où vraiment il fallait faire du slalom entre deux poubelles, c'est pas trop chouette.
So we're having a lot of strikes in England as well, and even though it does spoil a lot of the view and the smell, I do support the strikes. Retirement and pay is, important to a lot of people.
Bien sûr, Paris, sans poubelle, ce serait beaucoup plus joli, plus élégant, mais on comprend aussi la vie, l'économie, les conflits sociaux, des malentendus, etc.
The pension reform bill is in its final stages in the French Parliament, and there could be a decision this week. But in several cities in France, workers would prefer to throw the reform out with their rubbish.
Thousands of travellers were left stranded in airports across Germany after strike action led to hundreds of flights being cancelled. The industrial action at Berlin, Hamburg and Hanover is the latest stoppage by airport staff in a long-running dispute over pay. Unions are seeking a 10.5% salary increase for security and ground crews. Management have so far offered just 5%. Further talks will take place on March the 27th.
It's a reputation that this small Belgian town would like to do without. Zwijndrecht, located near the Flemish city of Antwerp, is one of Europe's hotspots for areas contaminated with PFAS chemicals, otherwise known as forever chemicals. They're notorious for their indestructible nature and extremely slow degradation rates. For local residents, the contamination by the nearby 3M factory has turned their lives into a living nightmare. They've been advised to stop eating the fruit, veg and eggs produced there. But this caution goes beyond just food.
On nous demande par exemple de ne pas travailler avec les mains nues dans la terre. Il y a des gens, effectivement, comme mon épouse, travaillent la terre avec des gants. On nous demande aussi, attention, les petits-enfants, jouer dans l'herbe, il ne faut quand même pas exagérer, grimper dans les arbres, faites attention. À la fin, on ne peut plus rien faire.
Vincent no longer sells his eggs, but he doesn't want to sacrifice his 300 fruit trees and 3 vegetable gardens. This is despite the fact that PFAS chemicals, which are found in water and soil, can increase the risk of cancer and thyroid disease. They can also lead to a reduced immune response to vaccines in children. For residents of the town, this invisible threat isn't going away anytime soon, which for many is a worrying thought.
Mais d'autres personnes qui ont un beau jardin disent, écoute, moi je ne sors plus dans mon jardin. Je ne sors plus du tout. Il y a des gens qui ont eu un burn-out. Il y a des gens, il y a déjà quelques fois le mot de suicide qui est sorti. Il n'y a pas eu un cas de suicide, soyons honnêtes aussi. Mais il y a des gens qui ont vraiment peur.
PFAS chemicals are used in the textile, car and electronics industries, including for non-stick coatings on stoves, firefighting foams and rainwear. For Toon Penen, another resident of Zwijndrecht, there's no doubt in his mind as to who's responsible for the contamination.
The site of 3M is indeed the biggest pollutant, I think, even in Europe.
The American group reached an agreement last year with the Flemish government for €571 million in favour of local residents.
Ever again. It's the same like the concentrations in the bloods of the people of Zwijndrecht. It's also the highest the scientists ever seen in a human being. So.
Contacted by Euronews, 3M explains that it will work to discontinue the use of PFAS chemicals across its product portfolio by the end of 2025, adding that it does not change its long-standing position and that the company continues to act responsibly. The American group reached an agreement last year with the Flemish government for €571 million in favour of local residents.